I know. You're constantly making choices about your food, what you eat, what you avoid, where you get it, and how you factor in all the noise about what's right. But I think you're missing something really critical about how the food on your plate is deeply connected to everything you care about: your health, the community, the environment, and the economy. I'm Dana DePrima, founder of the Four Farmers Movement and host of the One Bite is Everything podcast, now proudly a part of Heritage Radio Network. Here we are reconnecting the dots, revealing the hidden forces behind our food system and why it matters more than ever. Each week, we uncover the real impact of what's on your plate, who controls it, what's at stake, and what you can do about it. Because food is more than just what you eat. It's quite literally connected to everything you care about. New episodes drop every Thursday. Subscribe to One Bite is Everything and take your seat at the table.
You're listening to Heritage Radio Network.
I wake up in the morning and I'm feeling a vibe. Give thanks to the Father, I'm breathing alive.
Culture and Flavor is a podcast about food and culture centered in Black and Indigenous foodways, hosted by myself, Zella Palmer, right here in New Orleans, Louisiana. Each episode features high vibrational conversations with cultural bearers, chefs, farmers, scholars, barbecue pit masters, and more. Where there is flavor, there is history. Join me on Culture and Flavor and all of my guests as we share stories that will have you praise dancing, cooking, conjuring, and inspiring your culinary journey. Welcome to another episode of Culture and Flavor with your host, Zella Palmer. Y'all, I'm so excited today to have this conversation with friend, colleague, cultural bearer in New Orleans who is doing amazing work. Curtis Doucette is the owner and developer of the Dewdrop Inn, a restored music venue and boutique hotel in New Orleans Central City. It reopened in March 2024. I was able to get a tour when it first opened, and y'all, it is amazing. But we're going to talk a little bit about more about Dewdrop Inn, the historic relevance of Dewdrop Inn. In 2021, Curtis acquired the historic Dewdrop Inn, once home to legendary artists like Ray Charles and Little Richard. After a 3-year renovation, it reopened with a 350-person music venue, 17 guest rooms. And y'all, those guest rooms are dedicated to different musical legends. I mean, I went into the Ray Charles room and my mouth dropped. It's a restaurant, it's a pool club, and Curtis got his MS from Columbia University and his BA from Dillard University. And he is committed to community development and supporting minority-owned businesses. So before we really delve into the conversation, I just want to just take us on this time travel machine. And it's 1939. Dewdrop Inn opens, and Frank Pena opens this incredible music venue. It is the Apollo of New Orleans. Some of the greatest musicians played, slept, ate, and recorded there. So welcome, Curtis. Welcome to Culture and Flavor. Let's get into Dewdrop Inn.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here talking to you, Zella.
So who was Frank Pena?
Frank Pena was a businessman who came to New Orleans from the city of Plaquemines around 1935 or so. He started off as a barber. He was a very young man at that point, mid-20s. And he started off as a barber. And the barbershop that he was working in was demolished. It was a spot across the street from the Dewdrop Inn. And it was demolished to make way for the federal government to build the first housing that the federal government had ever built for African Americans in the country. So that's a bit of a historic spot. Frank moved across the street and continued his barbering, but he also, over time, developed what would become the Dewdrop Inn that we know. And it starts with him being a barber and also booking acts on the Chitlin circuit in another location and other places. And ultimately, it landed as him having a barbershop, a nightclub that featured live music, a restaurant, a bar, and a hotel that was listed in the Green Book of Business in general. or actually, I believe it was the nightclub that was listed in the Green Book, and they were on the Chitlin circuit. So he's someone who created something very special. In your introduction, you talked about the significance of the Dewdrop Inn, and I think there could be a strong argument that it is, one of the most important music venues, significant music venues in the world. And that's because there are genres of music that were invented by the cast of characters who were there all the time. And were it not for the magic of Frank Panier, I don't know that we would be telling these stories. So he was a very special businessman, and a visionary.
Mm. Talk
Mhm.
to us about the Chitlin Circuit and the Green Book and the importance and relevance as it relates to Black music.
Yes, were it not for the Chitlin circuit, Black artists would not have had a place to perform. And if they did have a place to perform, they would not have had a place to perform for their people. Because during segregation, the artists, in some instances, they could play other places. They could play to white audiences, but they couldn't play to Black audiences in the well-known establishment. However, the Chitlin Circuit allowed that place for African Americans to perform and be seen by their people. And so, as I talk to some of the older artists who experienced that, they talk about how they were treated when they did go to those places where there were white audiences. When they got off stage, they had to go in a corner somewhere and be treated less than human, quite frankly. The Chitlin Circuit allowed a place for them to be at home, and I would imagine that that level of comfort and connectivity with your people had a huge impact on the performance and the music during that time. As far as the Green Book goes, it was, it just really dawned on me. And this is a simple thing, but the impact of it really just recently dawned on me. When folks would say that the Green Book would tell people where it's safe to go. And so it told you where it was safe to go in if you wanted to get a haircut or go to a bar or restaurant or stay at a hotel. And it was mainly for motorists because if you lived in a city, you pretty much already knew where it was safe for you to go. But back in those days, going to the wrong establishment could very well have cost you your life. So it shouldn't be lost on us how significant and important the Green Book was. And so to be listed in the Green Book for the Dewdrop Inn or any establishment that was listed in the Green Book is a huge honor and something that we should always remember. I also think that segregation was, in a way, helpful to the development of music because it gave Black artists no choice but to be together and to build. And so if you think about something as simple as like, who invented rock and roll? You can just name a whole bunch of names, a lot of them here in New Orleans. Folks like Fats Domino and Dave Bartholomew in partnership. You could think about Ike Turner, but you could also think about people like um, Professor Longhair, who influenced Fats Domino. And if it weren't for those almost forced collaborations or forced coming together, even if it's just for jam sessions, I don't know if music would have evolved the same way. And the truth of it is that Black music is American music, and I don't know if it would have happened that way if it weren't for segregation. So that's a silver lining from my perspective and an example of the resilience of our people.
You mentioning just some of the experiences that Black Americans had during segregation made me think of a story of my mom just telling me that when they would go down south sometimes, how if um, a boarding house was booked, sometimes they'd have to sleep on pool hall tables,
Mm, yeah.
and and that scene, one of the classic. I mean, I just love that series, and I was so sad, like so many of you all, um, that we weren't able to see a second season of Lovecraft Country. But that scene where, you know, um, the uncle was trying to plot out places where Black Americans could go in the Green Book, and the violence, the restaurant owner and all the people in the town came after them with guns blazing. That put things into perspective of how important and integral the Green Book was at that time. What were some of the stories that just warm your heart about Dewdrop Inn, that maybe some of the elders who once played there remembered?
Mhm. Well, recently I had a conversation during Jazz Fest, actually in front of an audience with Leo Nocentelli of the Meters. And he played at the Dewdrop Inn, as he said, just as Leo. This was before the Meters was a thing. And one thing that he told me is that there was, and speaking on this topic, there was an artist who had been assaulted in Mississippi by the Ku Klux Klan and uh, beaten almost to death. And so he was in the hospital, and the musicians did a benefit to raise money for that artist. I hear stories like that. Uh, as much as it's sad, the reason, but it's really heartwarming to hear that folks were coming together in that way. A lot of times, the thing that warms my heart the most sometimes is just running into some of the older people who have performed. And I'm not talking about stars or people of Leo's caliber, but uh, there was a gentleman who was there just recently for Jazz Fest, and he was a grandfather of one of my friends. And I asked him if he had been to the Dewdrop in his day, and he said, I sang here. And to have those moments with someone like that. And he said, I sang here, but it wasn't fancy like this. And I said, well, sir, you really deserve it, right? And the people like you who paved the way for us to be here today really deserve it. And it's no knock on what was done back then. The Dewdrop Inn was not as fancy because we didn't have the resources to be as fancy these days. But by today's standard, I believe that the Dewdrop Inn should feel a little bit luxurious in honor of our ancestors.
Mm-hmm. What were some of the steps that you took to make sure that you were, going to take this project on?
I felt compelled by the history of the Dewdrop Inn. There is musical history, as I mentioned earlier. I really could make the case that if rock and roll wasn't invented there, the true king of rock and roll, as acknowledged by Elvis Presley, Fats Domino,
Mm-hmm.
who worked with Dave Bartholomew, who was our band leader. Those folks were the cast of characters at the Dewdrop Inn. You had all the big time musicians who came through, folks like James Brown and Tina Turner and um, John Coltrane, and a really long list of people who came through the Dewdrop Inn. The musical history was compelling, and I started to really, it wasn't something that I understood immediately, the gravity of it, the significance of it. But then beyond that, there was other history that I thought was really significant, such as civil rights history. The fact that white people would get arrested when they would come to the Dewdrop Inn because we were in the midst of segregation. And Frank decided to hire A. Turo and Dutch Muriel to fight against the city of New Orleans on behalf of owners, on behalf of bar owners. And, those two people are very significant figures in our city. There was an LGBTQ history associated with the Dewdrop Inn, as our MC was Patsy Vidalia or Patsy Valdez on stage, but Urban Ale by day, and so beloved that Patsy had an annual gay ball every year for Halloween at the Dewdrop Inn. It was all of that history combined that made me realize that this was something that I just really needed to do. I didn't do hospitality projects prior to this one, and probably a little bit crazy for taking that on, but I just could not, at some point, imagine not doing this project. And so I'm a real estate developer first, and I was doing affordable housing, or still am, and affordable housing is some of the most difficult to finance. They call it brain damage when you put together the capital stack associated with that financing. And although I hadn't worked with a lot of the financial tools that we use for the Dewdrop In, I was familiar enough with how they work because of other financial tools that I use. And I was also fortunate enough to have a network of real estate developer friends who had done some of these things so they can point me in the right direction. And so it really took um, first the love that came from my why, and then the skill set that I had been building unknowingly for a little bit over 20 years, uh, probably toward this moment.
I think for those who have been to the Dewdrop Inn, to in this era, um, you can see the love in every detail. I remember when you gave me the tour, and for those of you all who haven't been to Dewdrop Inn or haven't been to New Orleans in a while, um, right when you walk in, there's like a little museum that looks like a barber shop, and it has all the history of the Dewdrop Inn. And then there's this live, stage and the bar, and the cocktail menu is intentional. And then you go to the hotel portion, and y'all, the hotel portion, and just, where the rooms are dedicated to Ray Charles, Little Richard, AP Turo, and each one, when you go in the Ray Charles room, there's all these vintage photos, and you just feel like you're stepping into the 1950s, and it's such a and it's really, such a beautiful place. But I really love to see, the footage of people like, legendary musicians now, PJ Morton, um, other artists that came for the Jazz Fest, and they are, performing. And I mean, I had a moment when I saw Anderson .Paak, jam all
Mhm.
night, and I was just like, I was on the just cutting up that night.
Mhm.
So, and I just, and then even, new artists to New Orleans, when you did Cuban night, and you had a pianist named Victor Campbell, who is now a
Mhm.
New Orleanian, and his whole Cuban entourage. There's lots of Cuban musicians now living in New Orleans that are doing amazing work too. So I love to see it, and the local talent, Big Frida, all the amazing artists that are doing work today. So looking back, how do you make sure that you also honor the elders, the living elders that are still here, as and bridging it to the new generation of artists that, are need to tell a whole nother story?
Yeah, I think the first thing is to keep the history top of mind. And that's something that we really try to do. And as you talked about, you can't really walk in the building without seeing the history and feeling the history. And I don't know whether people feel it because they're spiritual
Hmm.
and they're in the space, or they feel it because of what they see in terms of the history that we've preserved. But that's step one, is to know our history and to always be working to it, to acknowledge it and and highlight it.
Hmm.
The next step is to try to live within that. I always say that, and I would say this even as we were building the Dewdrop In. The goal is for us to live in the spirit and make the Dewdrop In as close to what it used to be again as we can. And in some ways, some of the things you just mentioned tell me that we're on the right track. We're doing some of those things. And so I think once you have like the spirit of the place in your bones, it becomes a little bit easy to make the moves that continue that. And, some of that is spiritual, some of that is beyond my scope of capabilities, and that's where I feel like the universe steps in. And I couldn't book the Jazz Fest lineup that we have, but PJ could, and PJ Morton came in and said, he's already an investor in the project, and he said, "Hey, I'd like to have an active role in booking the Jazz Fest, and and there's going to be more that he'll be doing in connection with us." And so, I feel like my expertise really ends at building the building, but my passion, my love for the place is still a guiding force. And I really felt like you build it and they will come. You build it with that intention and
Mhm.
they will come. And so we have made a place that, for instance, the sound system at the Dewdrop Inn is phenomenal. It is exceptionally good for a venue of its size. But I knew that because of who we were, we'd be able to punch above our weight class in terms of who we could attract. So, as you mentioned, we've had Anderson Paak perform on our stage. We've had DJ Questlove do his thing at the Dewdrop Inn. We've had PJ. We've had Tank. We've had Big Frida. We've had comedians like Hannibal Buress and Craig Robinson do shows at the Dewdrop Inn. So we're already living in the spirit of that. Now, there's some parts of it that I cannot force. I can book the big names if we can find a way to make it work. And we've been fortunate to be able to do that. But then there's a magic of musical innovation that I hope when we look back at the Dewdrop Inn today, 50 years from now, we might be able to pinpoint those moments where, you know what, that new genre, that new thing that we were doing, that was happening with the regular cast of characters at the Dewdrop Inn.
Mhm.
But I think that's only something that we could judge probably in hindsight. But I do think that as long as we are hosting New Orleans musicians, it's almost inevitable that that's going to happen
Mhm.
because I firmly believe that in New Orleans, inventing music is just what we do. So we get all the credit that we deserve for jazz. We don't get the credit that we deserve for innovations in rhythm and blues and the invention of rock and roll. It's part of my mission as well, is to make sure that we get our credit for those things. But I do believe that whatever's next will probably have a hand in that too. So I just want to provide the stage for the people who are doing that.
Y'all, when we come back after a few messages from our advertisers, we're going to talk about Little Richard, Ray Charles, and the future of the Dewdrop Inn.
This episode is brought to you by Plugra European Style Butter, crafted for those who demand precision and exceptional results in the kitchen. With 82% butter fat and a slow churn process, Plugra gives you flakier crusts, fluffier cakes, and rich, melt in your mouth pastries. Because great baking starts with great butter. Unlike standard American butters, which have only 80% butter fat, Plugra ensures the ideal moisture and fat balance so your recipes turn out just right every time. That's why professional chefs trust Plugra and home bakers love it. Plugra's slow churn process creates a smooth, creamy butter that gives dough a soft, pliable texture, making rolling, folding, and laminating effortless. Whether you're perfecting a buttery pie crust or layering a delicate croissant, Plugra helps you bake with confidence. Experience the difference for yourself. Find Plugra in stores near you or visit plugra.com. That's Plugra.com.
Y'all, we're back. So I would love for you to tell the story about Little Richard and just his experience and his story at the Dewdrop Inn.
Yeah. Well, so first of all, I say to people all the time that Little Richard wouldn't be the Little Richard that we know if it weren't for things that happened at the Dewdrop Inn. And that's not to take full credit for Little Richard's success, but there were pivotal moments and people that Little Richard met. And those moments happened at the Dewdrop Inn. And those people he met at the Dewdrop Inn, or they were also the regular cast of characters at the Dewdrop Inn. So, as an example, Escarita is a huge influence on Little Richard. And if you saw a picture of Escarita, you'd see similar hairstyles, similar flair for dress. Little Richard said later in his life that he had never known a piano player who was better than Escarita, which is a hell of a compliment for a man who had traveled the world playing with the caliber of musicians that Little Richard did. But the real lore of Little Richard at the Dewdrop Inn is that he came to New Orleans to record. And as I understand it, he was actually introduced to the idea of coming to New Orleans to record by our MC, Patsy Vidalia, who had been out there in Georgia and met him, encouraged him to come to the city. So he was recording with Casa Matassa, and they were trying to get him to sound like Nat King Cole or somebody that already existed. And the music industry being formulaic is nothing new. It wasn't working out because that's not who Little Richard is. So he decided to they decided to call it a day. and they went to the Dewdrop Inn to hang out. That's just what people did back then. Well, Little Richard gets there to the Dewdrop Inn. He sees a piano and an audience, and that's all he needs. He jumps on the piano. Wop bop loo bop wop bamboo, tutti frutti, good booty, breezy, make it easy. If it don't fit, don't force it. Those were the original lyrics to the song. The production team saw it, heard it, and said, "Wow, this is a hit. We just need to clean up those lyrics for 1950s radio." And they did, and that became the Tutti Frutti that we all know. And, that's not just a hit. That is one of those trailblazing songs in rock and roll.
Mm-mm-mm. And, you know, Little Richard, it was so many others also that contributed to the legacy of the Dewdrop and then the legacy of American music that spread globally. I mean, when I look at the list of folks that performed or stayed there, like you said previously, Fats Domino, Tina and Ike Turner, Otis
Yeah.
Redding, James Brown, Irma Thomas, Alan
Mhm.
Toussaint, Sam Cooke. I mean, there's
Mhm.
so many legendary performers that have performed there. But I want to ask you about one of my favorite legendary performers.
Mhm.
I'll never forget Miss Leah Chase, God rest her soul. And her husband was a music promoter too, which is, it kind
Mhm.
of coalesces with all of this. Food and music are so integral to the city of New Orleans. And Miss Leah would bring, she said, whenever Ray was in town, she said he would ask for stewed chicken. And I would go wherever he was and bring him stewed chicken, you know.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
so tell us about Ray Charles and the Dewdrop Inn.
Mhm. If I could for a second. So Leah Chase's husband is also one of the performers who performed at the Dewdrop Inn. We have
Mm,
the bill from that night with him and his band. So that
wow.
history is also interconnected. Ray Charles was a regular at the Dewdrop Inn so much that he was kind of like a friend of the family. When I talked to Mr. Jackson, Kenneth Jackson, the grandson of Frank Panier, he says that just as a child, he just remembers Ray Charles just hanging out like in the living room, like no big deal. Speaking of food, I've heard Ray Charles talking about the Dewdrop Inn, and more than music, he talked about red beans and rice at the Dewdrop Inn, which he said was the best that he ever had.
Mm,
So, he had he spent a lot of time at the Dewdrop Inn. Frank was his booking agent at one point,
mm,
and so his connection is very close. He stayed at the Dewdrop Inn for a time, and if he didn't stay at the Dewdrop Inn, he was staying down the street at Foster Hotel, which no longer exists, which was another black-owned hotel. And as we were doing the research, my son happens to be one of the researchers with a group named Civic Studio. They would say that Ray Charles would walk from Foster's, which is about a block and a half away, by himself. And, he could tell by tapping his cane the sounds, and he knew exactly when he got to the Dewdrop Inn.
mm.
And that was a daily thing. He would come to the Dewdrop Inn. So he's very, very much a part of our history. And in fact, we do a show on Saturdays now that talks about it's called The Legends of the Dewdrop Inn, and it really talks about how music evolved with a cast of characters who were associated with the place. So, of course, we talk about Fats Domino and Dave Bartholomew and their contributions. But then there's other people like Huey Piano Smith, who a lot of people haven't heard of, who made huge contributions. There's um, goodness, I'm blanking on the drummer. Uh, Sorry about that, but I'll remember the drummer's name later. But there's key musicians who have performed at the Dewdrop Inn, and we talk about those stories, but we also talk about Ray Charles and how Ray Charles brought gospel into the sound of gospel into secular music, which, as we say during the show, is quite scandalous. So, he performed there all the time. The musicians who have been there, they talk about seeing him perform or performing with him and having those opportunities. And, Ray Charles came to New Orleans. He was quoted as saying, I needed to get that New Orleans sound. And once again, that's something that we do that's really special in New Orleans. I think we have a very unique sound, and we're always at the forefront of innovation in music. So any great musician probably wants to be part of New Orleans.
You got that right. And y'all, if you get a chance, definitely come and visit the Dewdrop Inn because any night there is a night of pure, raw, music that's unfiltered and it's nothing like you've ever, experienced before. And I'm just really proud of the work that they're doing. Um, I would love for you just to kind of talk about maybe some of the current, artists, any
Mhm.
stories that you have that you'd like to share with our audience, just, that made you just say, this is why I
Mhm.
restored this legendary hotel and music venue.
Yeah. So first of all, I'm a sucker for things that connect to the past. So there was a moment during our Jazz Fest nights where Tank from Tank and the Bangers was on stage. It was her night, and she ended up with PJ Morton on stage and Trombone Shorty on stage as well. And I already knew that Trombone Shorty's grandfather had performed at the Dewdrop Inn, but I did not know that Tank's grandfather had performed at the Dewdrop Inn. We have Trombone Shorty's grandfather, Jesse Hill. We have images of the bill from that night. So we knew that, but she mentioned and had just learned because she was performing there that her grandfather performed there. So it was really touching for me to see this moment where two descendants of people who have made it really big in the music industry were on the stage at the same time
Mhm.
and doing their thing at the Dewdrop. That's a moment that felt worth it to me. There's the jam session that we do on Wednesdays where there's a little bit of discovery happening. Every Wednesday, we have a great band and a great host, and it seems as though everybody in the audience is a hell of a singer, some except me. And so so it's almost like you can stick the mic in anybody's face and it's going to be magical. And those nights have been really special for me. And there's moments where I've seen artists on stage and immediately talk to them after. There's a young lady who her name is Kayla Love, and she did a show. Well, she did the jam session one time, and I immediately talked to her after the show. And when she came to us to do her show, it was a full concert. I'm talking
Mm,
background singers, dancers, wardrobe changes. I mean, we have great shows at the Dewdrop, but I haven't seen anyone go that far as to make it a total concert experience, right?
mm,
And so she's a hell of a singer. She's a very young lady, newly conducting the business of music. And so, we're trying to, as an example of somebody that we're working to cultivate. And I I hope that her career will be great. And I hope that in some small way we'll have a hand in that. But those moments like that really make me feel like we're on the right course and make me feel really good about what we're doing.
and I wish, have you thought about, I'm just curious for the future of Dewdrop in some, I know that we have tiny desk and things of that nature. Have you thought
Mhm.
about doing some live performances from the Dewdrop in just so the world can see?
Mhm. We certainly have thought about that. So there's so many things in the future. I mean, we are really just getting started. There's still unrealized visions. One of them would be live performances. One of the other things that I do is I have in-depth conversations with artists,
Hmm.
typically to promote a show that's coming up. And that's something that's starting to grow legs.
Hmm.
And so when I really think about, Tiny Desk already exists, but uh, I and that doesn't mean that we can't do that, right? But I think there's a special lane for us to have in-depth conversations with the artists, and so people can get an opportunity to see their favorite artists in a light that maybe they haven't seen before.
Indeed, indeed. And, just to kind of wrap up this conversation, um, you touched on it a lot throughout this conversation. What makes New Orleans so special?
Oh goodness. One word would be culture. That would that would wrap it all up. But if you wanted to go into detail about that, I mean, you're pound for pound, you're not going to get better food anywhere. And what we do we do well and we do better than anybody. Musically, as I mentioned earlier, we just invent music. And I'll get on that in a second, but where else could you go and see what the Mardi Gras Indians do, the Black masking Indians? It's a very special thing. And I say, where else can you see it? But of course, there are places in the diaspora where you can see similar things. And I love that connectivity. But I remember a classmate from the Midwest, from graduate school. He happened to be in the city, and we just bumped into a second line and started following it. It was a regular old work day, you know. And and he said, "Man, I never knew that this existed." And I was like, "Yep." And he said, "No, I want you to understand what I'm saying. I'm not saying I haven't seen it before. I did not know it existed. There's things here in this city that we do that people have never seen and that are very special." But then when it comes to music, something that's really dawned on me relatively recently is that there's a reason that we're at the forefront of musical evolution. And the way that I see it now is that because of Mardi Gras, we have a strong band culture in the city. There was that movie American Pie back in the day where they were talking about band geeks, and I was like, what is a band geek, right? It was the first time that I had even heard of that, and it was weird to me because in New Orleans, the folks in the band are maybe cooler than the athletes, at least as cool.
Hmm. So true.
And yeah, and so knowing that cool is the currency of the young, these young people have all the reason in the world to cultivate their gifts. I'm talking like really young, in some cases, before they even get to middle school, they're cultivating their musical chops. And so, of course, with people who have been honing their skills at such a young age, for those of them who make it to the top, who are the cream of the crop, among the cream of the crop in New Orleans, those people are going to do something special. You can almost bet, right? So I think that as long as we are doing what we're doing in the schools and with parades, I think that we're going to always have a strong impact on music.
On a spiritual note, I just when I think about the Dewdrop Inn and what you've done with your partners, the community, I mean, everyone, you know, um, worked and prayed and, did so much to make this, legendary, historic landmark reopen. And I think about what's happening in the music industry, you know, and how
Hmm.
you all are the Dewdrop Inn is right on time, to go back to um the love, the passion, you know.
Hmm.
And I'm sure in the near future, I mean, it's already happening, that there will be more artists flocking from all over the world just to say, I went to the Dewdrop Inn, I spent a night at the Dewdrop Inn.
Absolutely.
So it will be. So thank you,
Yeah,
Curtis. Thank you so much. Thank you so
thank
much.
you. And I appreciate you saying that, and I truly believe it. And we're already starting to see that. Some of the artists who have come to perform, they stayed at the Dewdrop, and they raved about time that they had and how much they enjoyed not only the stage but the hotel. So
Hmm.
it's something that I've always expected to happen, and it's happening. So I'm very excited about it. And I also thank you, Zella, for having this opportunity to talk about it.
Absolutely, absolutely. We want to give you your flower, your gardens now, because
Yes,
you are we cherish you in New Orleans and you've done, something
thank you,
incredible that the ancestors, I'm sure, are guiding you and protecting you.
thank you, and I need it.
Sure, we all do.
Right, right. And same to you, Zella. You're doing so many special things, and I appreciate you taking the time out to acknowledge the Dewdrop Inn and the significance of it.
So y'all heard it here on Culture and Flavor. Make sure when you come to New Orleans that you go to the Dewdrop Inn. You won't regret it. Trust me. And ask for Curtis. Thank you.
Thank you.
I wake up in the morning and I feeling a vibe. Yeah. Give thanks to the Father, I'm breathing alive.
Culture and Flavor is powered by Simplecast. Thanks for listening to Heritage Radio Network, food radio supported by you. Keep in touch at heritageradionetwork.org.
I know. You're constantly making choices about your food, what you eat, what you avoid, where you get it, and how you factor in all the noise about what's right. But I think you're missing something really critical about how the food on your plate is deeply connected to everything you care about: your health, the community, the environment, and the economy. I'm Dana DePrima, founder of the Four Farmers Movement and host of the One Bite is Everything podcast, now proudly a part of Heritage Radio Network. Here we are reconnecting the dots, revealing the hidden forces behind our food system and why it matters more than ever. Each week, we uncover the real impact of what's on your plate, who controls it, what's at stake, and what you can do about it. Because food is more than just what you eat. It's quite literally connected to everything you care about. New episodes drop every Thursday. Subscribe to One Bite is Everything and take your seat at the table.